I crossed the oceans of time to find you. How beautiful and moving confession. It's because of this sentence a lot of people would be attracted to cruel, bloodthirsty, and dark night, tender vampire, and even the mysterious vampire movies. Hello, everyone. Today, Josie is going to share with you one of the most classic and epic vampire movies ever made, Bram Stoker's Dracula, which released in 1992. Josie's channel is dedicated to discovering and introducing niche movies, dedicated to the unique you. So please don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any updates. In 1462, the Turkish army swept across the continent, threatening the status of Christianity in Europe. The general Count Dracula was called in, and the newly married man was forced to separate from his beloved wife Elizabeth and fight against the Turkish army. Dracula led the soldiers to fight bravely and soon grasped the initiative of the war, but in his triumph, the enemy, in order to disturb the morale of the army, spread the rumor that Dracula has died in battle. His wife Elizabeth got the news, grief, and chose to commit suicide in the river. The triumphant Count Dracula returns with only the cold corpse of his wife. Not only could that, but the priest told him that Elizabeth's soul not go to heaven but to hell because she had committed suicide against the doctrine. Dracula was furious and asked God in despair why the faithful could not have God's mercy, and why the faith for which he had worked his whole life had brought his wife to such a miserable end. With these words, Dracula pierced the icon of Jesus on the cross with his sword, and blood flowed from the icon. He drank the blood and vowed to feed on it from now on. So Dracula chose to accompany Elizabeth, fell into hell, into the arms of the devil. This was the birth of Dracula, the most famous vampire in European history. After centuries of vicissitudes, the once famous Dracula family castle has become a grim, dark, lifeless place. Dracula lived in this castle, a symbol of hell, waiting for his wife to reincarnate and meet her again. Late that night, the castle welcomed a guest, and Dracula's purchased business Jonathan. After explaining his purpose, he was warmly received by the Count Dracula. Though Dracula looked pale and creepy in his red trench coat, Jonathan plucked up his courage and went inside. Dracula ushered Jonathan into the hall and demanded that the house papers be processed overnight. It turned out that Dracula needed fresh blood to make a living, but there was little life around the castle, so Dracula decided to move quickly to London, where there was life and blood. They go to the Home Office, and during their conversation, Dracula comes across a photo that Jonathan has with him. The woman in the photo, Jonathan's fiancée Mina, bears a striking resemblance to Dracula's late wife Elizabeth. Dracula was thrilled. He said it was a godsend. Mina must be Elizabeth's reincarnation. Said in spite of tears of emotion, and murmured, "Who find true love is the luckiest people." After helping Dracula with the house purchase, Jonathan told Dracula that he will marry Mina. When Dracula learned of this, he immediately proposed to Jonathan that he should stay at the castle for another month to teach the manners of London life. Jonathan felt very abrupt, but was tempted by the generous commission, chose to stay, and as Count Dracula arranged to write a letter to Mina, explaining the situation. Not long after Jonathan lived in the castle, he saw many strange things in it. Dracula, for example, always appeared and disappeared by his side. He often found a ghost hovering near him, and the howl of wild animals outside the castle was always provoking people. In fact, these were Dracula, who had thought many times about strangling Jonathan so that he could be with Mina, who was his wife's reincarnation. But when he heard from his servant Renfie of Jonathan's devotion to Mina, he felt a deep admiration for the young man. Until one night, when Jonathan accidentally opened the window, he saw Count Dracula crawling along the walls of the castle. Driven by curiosity, Jonathan took courage and decided to explore the surroundings of the castle. Unexpectedly, he stumbled into a room where there were 3 shining female vampires. They were the vampire brides Count Dracula had married over 400 years. Jonathan is seduced by a vampire bride and almost loses his life, but Count Dracula arrives just in time. Now that Jonathan knows the truth, Dracula imprisons him in the castle and orders his servants to keep him under guard, while he takes 50 boxes of soil from his hometown and embarks on a ship to London to find Mina. That night, Dracula took the night to London by boat. Number of crew members inexplicably disappeared. Dracula's arrival makes the recovery of London hidden dark power. The whole city is in a mysterious atmosphere of terror. Dracula's first victim in London turned out to be Mina's best friend Lucy. Dracula turns into a werewolf and charms Lucy and has sex with her. Mina just ran into a werewolf deluded Lucy. When Dracula see the lover of the past life, he was overwhelmed and ran away in a hurry. Mina rushed to check on Lucy, and as Lucy regained her sanity, she told Mina that she was in a trance, as if the werewolf had absorbed her blood. Meanwhile, Dracula became young and handsome again after feeding on Lucy's blood. When he saw Mina, who looked exactly like Elizabeth, Dracula became convinced that Mina was his wife's reincarnation. To bring back Mina's past life memories, Dracula starts scheming to get close to her by dressing himself up as a dashing gentleman and creating a chance encounter with Mina on the street. However, hundreds of years have passed. Mina is still waiting for the return of her fiancé Jonathan. She is cool to a stranger's accost at first, but in the face of the elegant and polite Dracula, Mina seems to be attracted to him in her heart. Past life love is like a buried in the blood of the wire. Dracula's slightest facial expression can always let Mina's beat fast, and even agreed to go to the movies theater with Dracula. After watching the film, Dracula begins to try to evoke Mina's past life memories and pronounces the moving words, "I have crossed oceans of time to find you." Dracula looked at the beautiful Mina and almost turned her into a vampire. However, he wants Mina to love him as much as she had in the previous life. Afterwards, Mina and Dracula start date. They have dinner, talk about life philosophy, the stinging pain of love 400 years ago, flashing in the Mina head, the sort of choking despair, is filled with wounds of drowning her out in the past. She cannot help but shed tears of pain. Dracula could not bear to love into the whirlpool of pain. The past is gone. He tried to make Mina laugh. Finally, across the 400 years of yearning, they kiss together. Jonathan is trapped in the castle and tortured, harassed by female vampires. In order to see his beloved fiancée again, he is always looking for a chance to escape from the castle. Finally, on a rainy night, while the female vampires and servants are asleep, Jonathan successfully escapes from the castle and hides in a convent. He entrusts a nun to send a message to Mina, asking her to marry him in the convent. Soon, Mina received a message from Jonathan. Mina was in a dilemma. On one side is her devoted fiancé, on the other side is Dracula, her husband 400 years ago. Mina broke the news to her friend Lucy, who was delighted to see her and urged her to marry Jonathan. Even though she was reluctant to give up Dracula, she finally chose to marry Jonathan and fulfill her promise of love in this life. On the boat, Mina tore up her diary, which contained details of her date with Dracula, to save her past love for the deep sea forever. Dracula received a letter from Mina and learned that his lover had chosen to continue to fulfill their engagement with the husband of this life. He was heartbroken. In an instant, he became old and ugly, and the bone-breaking despair made him mad. Lucy, who was bitten by Dracula, was getting worse and worse. She was manic and bloodthirsty for no reason, and her mouth also grew fangs, which often wanted to bite people and suck blood. Lucy's strange illness soon attracted the attention of Dr. Van Helsing in London. Van Helsing is not only a doctor but also a monster hunter, with an eye for the bizarre. After reviewing a great deal of information, Van Helsing concludes that Lucy's illness is related to the vampire described in the book. Dracula suddenly appeared next to Lucy, drained her of blood, and sped away. Lucy's death leaves her family devastated, and Van Helsing suspects that Lucy has become a vampire. So they came to Lucy's tomb and found that the coffin was empty. Just as everyone was wondering, Lucy came down the stairs with the baby in her arms and started spewing blood. Van Helsing quickly reacts, forces Lucy back into the coffin with a cross, and then has an iron chisel driven into Lucy's heart. Then he cut off her head with a quick knife, so that Lucy's soul could rest in peace. Mina and Jonathan were joined and married in a simple and intimate ceremony at the convent. Soon, however, word came of Lucy's death, and they decided to return to London. At the funeral, they meet the monster hunter Van Helsing, who tells Jonathan that Dracula is not only cunning, but also free to transform into various animals and even dust, but these powers must be nourished by the soil of his native land. Away from the soil of his native land, Dracula's powers would weaken or even disappear. Then Jonathan suddenly remembered that Dracula had taken 50 boxes of earth with him when he left the castle and came to London, and thought that it would be easy to destroy them against Dracula. Jonathan and Van Helsing hit it off immediately, and they set Mina up in a safe place. Afterwards, they let a group of men search Dracula's residence in London. That night Dracula found Mina in a trace of dust and enchanted her mind. Mina, who can't tell the difference between reality and dreams, is very happy to see Dracula, and they reveal their true feelings as before. Dracula confessed to Mina that he had killed Lucy, but since Mina had been deluded and blinded by love, she became a slave to love. In order to make love to Dracula for all eternity, she begs him to turn her as vampire. Dracula was more than happy. He slowly bit open Dracula's neck, nibbled and tasted Mina's blood, then slit his chest and let Mina drink his blood. So they suck each other's blood, as if a passionate love poured into each other's body and mind. Just then Jonathan and Van Helsing arrived with their men. Dracula sensed that they were hiding a plot to kill, immediately turned into a monster, ready to kill, but he did not know that Jonathan and Van Helsing had just found Dracula hidden in the monastery soil and set fire to it. So now Dracula has lost his powers, who is vulnerable. Dracula found anything but reassuring. He chose to avoid it for a while and fled the monastery. When Mina is restored to sanity, she starts to transfer into a vampire. Since she has exchanged blood with Dracula, she is able to telepathic with Dracula. Van Helsing sees this situation, directly hypnotize Mina, and according to her telepathic access to Dracula's whereabouts. Dracula, who lost the soil of his hometown, decided to return to the castle by boat. Van Helsing and Jonathan also split up. Van Helsing, with Mina, gets to the castle before Dracula does, kills all the other vampires in the castle, and waits for Dracula to return and kill him. Jonathan, with a team of monster hunters, was ready to stop Dracula halfway. Just as Jonathan was about to catch up to Dracula, Mina sensed that Dracula was in danger. The memory of Elizabeth's love with Dracula, 100 years ago, reawakened in her body. In order to protect Dracula, she summons the wind and rain to the sky, and the wind suddenly becomes strong. The bad weather affects the pursuit process of Jonathan and Van Helsing, and also saves time for Dracula to escape. But Dracula, who had lost his powers, was caught up by them before sunset. In front of the castle, Mina witnessed Dracula's throat slit with a sword by Jonathan and his heart stabbed by Van Helsing's men. Just as Jonathan was about to kill Dracula, Mina, frantic with love, rushed forward and put her gun in front of the mortally wounded Dracula. Jonathan is deeply in love with Mina. His heart is broken, but he can't kill his lover. So, helplessly watching Mina desperately drag the injured Dracula into the castle, came to the place where she fell for love in her previous life. In the face of the ugly and dying Dracula, she kissed him with deep feeling. This deep love let Dracula get rid of the curse. Then a ray of sunlight came into the castle and fell on Dracula's face. He was back to his youthful, handsome self. In the final moments of his death, Dracula finally realized that he was back in the arms of God and knew what true and eternal love was. He looked at Mina fondly and left his words, "Let me rest in peace." In the end, he died as Count Dracula, God's protector. Mina watched her lover leave, and weeping, she pushed the dagger in Dracula's chest, piercing his heart and cutting off his head, so that his soul could rest. With the curse gone, Mina was redeemed and turned back into a normal human. 400 years of change, the world changes, but cannot change the lover's devotion, unswerving. The story begins as a heroic tragedy. Fortunately, both Dracula and Mina are redeemed by the end. Will they meet again in the next life? That's the end of the story. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, and follow. Josie will continue to work hard to show you more exciting content.